Welcome to CourtRoom Quarterback, the experiences and thoughts of a court-martial defense attorney.
Welcome back to CourtRoom Quarterback, the experiences and thoughts of a court-martial defense attorney with attorney Joseph L. Jordan. Founder of the Jordan UCMJ Law Group, Joseph is a former Army JAG and worldwide court-martial defense attorney who has tried more than 250 court-martials to verdict and handled thousands of military cases across the U.S. and Europe, the Pacific, and the Middle East. I'm your host, Lisa Mosby, and today we're looking at domestic violence allegations in the military. Thank you so much for joining me, Joseph.
Thank you for having me.
You know, Joseph, domestic violence cases have been increasingly common in the military justice system. From your perspective, what has changed about how these cases enter the system compared to earlier in your career?
That's a good question, Lisa. So earlier in my career, it wasn't much of an emphasis. In terms of how the cases come to light, it's not much has changed there. It's just whether or not we're going to put emphasis on, taking the claims seriously and pushing them forward in one vein or another. So here in the last 5 years or so, there's been a much more larger emphasis in the military to move these cases forward. And I think in large part it's due to some Congress, some congressional oversight. I think there's a bit of when the war died down for a little bit, we're starting to look at other things and start to pay attention to other things. Because at the height of the war, when I was an Army prosecutor at Fort Hood, for instance, I had a number of domestic violence cases across my desk, but the command wasn't interested in pushing those forward. And the military justice system has changed quite a bit in the military, so it's less commander centric, and a little bit more lawyer centric in terms of looking at the facts and talking with alleged victims and things of that nature. So I think that's why we're seeing more of an emphasis on domestic violence. I don't know that it means that we've had larger instances of it. I don't think that the numbers really have changed. If you look at the statistics of claims, vice statistics of what cases go forward. And there's some other, I think, political reasons too, in terms of why so many of these cases are going forward, because there's still a large percentage of them that don't have a lot of teeth to them.
And Joseph, many domestic violence allegations arise in the moments of conflict rather than isolated incidents. How do you start unpacking context without minimizing the seriousness of these allegations?
Well, first, you just focus on the facts themselves. Okay. So you just look at the brass tack facts that you have to deal with. What is indisputable? Then you start to look at just the context of the overall situation. What's the nature of the relationship like? How long have they been in a relationship? Do they have kids? Oftentimes you see conflict arise with families that have mixed kids, meaning you have blended families. So both parties have been, divorced before, but they're bringing kids from their previous relationships into this new relationship, and therein conflict arises. And so what is their conflict resolution process? How do they do things? You start to look at the various types of indicators that are out there to give you a sense for the veracity of the claim. And we're going to dive into that in a little bit here, so I don't want to get ahead of myself.
You know, what I'm aware of is in many of these cases, narratives often form very quickly. What kinds of assumptions tend to harden early, sometimes before all the facts are known?
We oftentimes run into confirmation bias with domestic violence, and it first and foremost starts with marks on the body. Okay, so you may see marks on the neck, for instance, or you may see, marks on arms or bruises and things of that nature. You may see or hear of evidence of, broken glass in the house or broken items in the house, broken portraits, things of that nature. So then automatically you're starting to think, hey, this is a really violent situation. And man, he must have, he really must have really went after her. And that's the number one issue right there, the confirmation bias. He must have really went after her, because the biggest assumption that we have to fight against is the fact that not all men are actual abusers. A lot of folks don't realize that there are a lot of women abusers out there. And what happens is they file a claim first before the man has an opportunity, because what person's going to believe a man when they're saying that their spouse or girlfriend is abusing them? And yes, a girlfriend, the military in general will prosecute domestic violence. They will charge, they call it intimate partner crime. And basically, an intimate partner is either your spouse or your significant other, girlfriend, boyfriend, that sort of thing. So that's the number one issue in terms of confirmation bias, is understanding that the female in a heterosexual relationship is oftentimes the abuser, but you don't see that. That's not the way the cases unfold. And so now you have to teach either the individual doing the charging or a potential jury, hey, she's the one that's the abuser. He's defending himself.
And Joseph, we know that domestic situations are rarely clean or linear. Exactly what you're saying. Is it he or is it she? He said, she said. Describe the complicating factors that you have to analyze in these cases.
Again, context matters. All right. So I always, when I analyze a case, and I've said this before in previous episodes, first I take the 30,000 foot view. Like, what is this thing really? All right. And then we start to drill down and we look at kind of the statements that were made, and we start to look for inconsistencies in those statements. Then we start looking at behaviors. All right. What are the behaviors of the two parties? Right. And then you start to look for triggers, because and I really hate that word, but I think it's a good description of understanding how a conflict in a relationship could be touched off. And so, what really caused this interaction to happen the way it did, and how and why did it escalate? And then again, those family dynamics really and truly matter. Okay. So are we dealing with stepkids in the family? And that oftentimes that's what I'm dealing with. It's a stepchild situation, and domestic violence isn't just limited to intimate partner violence. It's also encompassing the parental discipline aspect of things. So, we've defended cases wherein you're dealing with parents who are accused of abusing their children. And that's also couched under domestic violence. And so you want to look at the relationship between the child, the parent, and, one of the cases I'm going to discuss in a little bit, it's a situation where you have mom who's entered in a new relationship. She doesn't like biological dad. And so any little thing is a trigger, as it were, to set off a claim, an allegation, what have you. So you're really looking at the family dynamic aspect of things. And then you widen the lens a little bit. You look at the whole thing holistically. You look at finances. You look at past relationships. You look at how they resolve conflict in their own relationship and with others. And then you start to build a picture for what are the pressure points that you can use to defend your client.
Before we get into specific cases, I want to talk about command involvement. It can play a significant role in domestic violence cases. How does command pressure or risk aversion shape the way allegations are handled?
That's a good question. And in terms of domestic violence, that's less of an issue now. Commands typically are very risk averse. It's kind of a CYA. We're going to push this case in a judicial direction. But now we have something in the military, in all the branches of the military, called the Office of Special Trial Counsel. We call it the OSTIC for short. So certain allegations fall under their purview. So it's anything that's sex assault related, internet crimes against children, domestic violence. And so when those domestic violence claims are investigated by Army CID or NCIS in the Navy or OSI in the Air Force or CGIS in the Coast Guard, those cases, there's a briefing, there's an interface between those agencies and the OSTIC. Now, the OSTIC is made up of supposedly senior, experienced judge advocates who have litigation experience, more litigation experience than the normal judge advocate. And I say supposedly because what I'm starting to see, and what I saw in the past when they did a different program in the military, is that the quality of the attorney that's going into these positions is starting to get watered down. Um, at any rate, the Office of Special Trial Counsel looks at these allegations and then makes a charging decision. And if they choose not to charge it, then the case is deferred and sent back down to the command for them to take action. So judicial action is usually off the table at that point, since the Office of Special Trial Counsel said, no, we're not going to prosecute this. Now, the command has to make a decision. Do I want to reprimand the soldier? Do I want to give the soldier non-judicial punishment in Article 15 or Captain's Mast if you're in the Navy? Or do I want to send this to an administrative separation board? And so that's where the command starts to take more control after the OSTIC defers the case back down to the command, and then they make those decisions. And oftentimes I find myself in a board representing a service member with allegations of domestic violence because the OSTIC made the determination that they don't think they can prove the case beyond a reasonable doubt. But when you send it to an administrative separation board, the burden of proof is much less. It's preponderance of the evidence. And so therein lies an easier way to remove the service member from the service, because the evidentiary standard is described as 51% under preponderance of the evidence standard. And so it's even more difficult to defend the cases at that point. But that's where you see the command involvement at that point.
A lot of what you describe makes me think about credibility. And I know you've handled cases where credibility was the central issue rather than the physical proof. What tends to influence how panels assess credibility in domestic violence trials?
When I talk to panels, I tend to keep it real with them. Okay. Panels are very intelligent in the military. You're not going to fool them. You're not going to do smoke and mirrors with a panel in the military. It's just not going to happen. They're highly educated. They're highly experienced in life. You're not going to get someone that doesn't have a degree on a panel. It just doesn't happen. So the population that sits in a panel in judgment of a service member in a court martial is per capita more educated than what you would see in the civilian sector for a typical jury trial. It just is. So you're not going to pull the wool over their eyes. So you keep it real with them. And the reasonable person in the courtroom wins. Who's reasonable? What's the most reasonable and viable story? And you don't hide anything from them. You own what you can own. And you defend what you can defend. And that 9 times out of 10, you come out a winner.
So let's get into case specifics. Can you share a case where the initial allegation suggested one story, but after deeper examination revealed a very different reality? Maybe share what shifted your understanding in the case development?
Sure, I got a couple. So I want to first start with a warrant officer I represented at Fort Sill a few years ago. There, it was a situation where he was accused of abusing his son. So the, the married couple had divorced. He remained at Fort Sill. The wife moved to a different state, and I think it was during their second kind of summer exchange of the kids, there became some issues. And my client, being in the military and being at the time a drill sergeant, was very strict with his children. You know, you get up at a certain time, you eat your breakfast, you make your bed, you do the things that you're supposed to do before you go to entertain yourself. Like many of us who grew up in the military or have children while we're in the military, we have very similar standards for our kids. And so what I saw was nothing out of the ordinary. But the claim was that he had smacked his kid so hard that a tooth popped loose. And so, we got the pictures, we got the images, and the kid had also claimed that he was, getting spanked too hard, things of that nature. And so, and some of the other kids were also saying that dad was an abuser. So there's 3 kids involved. And it simply wasn't the case once you started unpacking everything. So we took a closer look at the son in general. And it turns out that he was about to lose that tooth anyway. Nobody saw my client smack the son in any case. He was getting ready to give his son a spanking and he ran away. tripped, it fell, and knocked out his tooth. And we had some extra evidence to support that. And so we were able to put forth a situation where, in this particular case, hey, look, this is all BS. And not only that, but the mother was a known manipulator and liar, and we were able to show the panel through cross-examination of witnesses and cross-examination of her that she had motive to lie. She was, because every time there was a claim, this wasn't the first claim that was made. Every time there was a claim made, she would immediately file a some sort of action in court to change the custody arrangement, those sorts of things. And so we started looking at the timing of things and kind of the pattern of things, and we saw, oh, okay, so these kids don't like direction. They're not getting any direction at home. The minute that they do get direction, they go running and crying to mom, and then they make things up. And so that turned out to be a win for that particular client. We had another one where it was at Fort Hood, and in that case, the house was trashed. She had a couple of bruises and whatnot, but what she didn't know is that my client was recording her every time she would attack him. And we had several recordings wherein I can remember one viscerally, and we played this for the panel so that they could see, the violent nature of this woman. She was claiming that, he had destroyed some property and things of this nature. He had built a dog house for their big dogs in the yard. And he had filmed her attacking him and destroying the doghouse. And that was a visceral moment for the panel to see, oh my God, like, he's not an abuser. He's trying to calm this situation down. Look at what she's doing. And so in no way, shape, or form could they, hold him responsible for her claims, because there were other things that we looked at. Of course, we caught her in several lies, those sorts of things. But being able to put a picture, a visceral picture, a real picture, moving picture. This was a recording of her actions. Really put a picture in the minds of the panel to say, hey, look, this isn't an abuser. In fact, he is being abused. And that's, a really good example to help people understand that, men can be abused too. And it happens more often than people care to admit, because we're such a paternalistic and masculine society. So,
Thank you for sharing those case studies. It really does help us to better understand, because I agree with you. I'm part of that group that didn't know that. There was no awareness within my world that that was the case, that men are also being abused. For someone facing a domestic violence allegation, what do you think is the most misunderstood aspect about how these cases actually unfold? And I think that's where we'll wrap it up today, if you'll share that.
I think it's what I've been kind of harping on, the fact that men can be abused too. I think that is it. So it's one of the things that I always ask when I'm talking to someone who's accused of it. We get these potential client calls and emails, and one of the first questions I will ask them is, okay, so were you defending yourself? Walk me through that. Is this the first time this has happened? What's your conflict resolution process? Have you had counseling? So, relationship dynamics, understanding those, and then also understanding that more men out there than than they care to admit are actually being physically abused, and it usually starts with mental abuse. That's where it really starts, and then it escalates from there. So when these couples don't get counseling, don't get help that they need to to resolve conflict within their own relationship, these things escalate out of control. And oftentimes the wrong person is accused of a crime.
And that's where we'll leave it today. Thank you so much for your insights and your guidance through this process. I think a critical part of your position is education, and you did share that at the beginning. That's one of the steps that we need to walk through so that people understand how these cases come about. Folks, thank you so much for listening to Courtroom Quarterback with attorney Joseph L. Jordan. To learn more about Joseph's worldwide court martial defense practice, visit jordanucmjlaw.com. And if you're following this series, be sure to subscribe, share, and leave a review if you found this episode helpful. And we'll see you next time.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.